Hey, Booster.
Hey, Dylan. Great to see you, my friend.
It's so good, always.
Yeah. Yeah. How are you feeling in this moment?
Good. I had some time to prepare, and so I feel very much focused and centered and ready.
Great, great, great. Well, I am excited about our session today. Um, in addition to sort of the normal coaching, I think that I as we talked about before, I'd like to be able to have just kind of a conversation about the plight of men in general in the world today and how that intersects with your experience. I got pulled into men's coaching really because I was in a really hard place at one point in my life. I was in a marriage for 10 years that was about 8 years too long. And it took me a long time to finally come to the decision to get a divorce, and it was the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. And in that time, I knew that I was going to need some support. So I started looking into local men's groups and workshops, and that ultimately led me to coaching, to hiring a coach to help me through that period. And I didn't realize at the time like how helpful having someone else's expertise with me moving through that painful period, how just really essential it was to my sanity and to really make turning a challenging chapter in my life into a real growth opportunity that set me on a path of personal development and emotional, like developing my emotional intelligence and my relational intelligence. So that years later, when I was fortunate enough to actually meet the love of my life, I had all of the tools that I needed to be able to have the relationship of my dreams, to have the kind of connection with my partner in a way that I had always sort of hoped was possible, but had never really fully experienced with someone before. And I am 100% certain that if I had not done that work, I would not have been ready for that relationship when it showed up. The hangups, the blind spots that I had previously in my marriage would have resurfaced, and I would have just wasted another beautiful woman's time and energy on me. Um, while because I hadn't done the work, but having done the work, it was a game changer. I learned how to deeply listen and to reflect and how to manage my emotions and how to have greater access to empathy and consideration, how to live a life of principle according to specific virtues that became a lifeline, kind of like a handrail that, like I'm a recovering liar. I grew up,
Mm.
when I was a kid, I was told by, I learned at a very early age that if you behaved in the way that grown-ups expected, then you could get away with a lot more. You could do what you wanted to do when they weren't looking, right? So I learned at an early age that my power came through deception. And it was a miswiring. It was an unfortunate, direction of development because that came to bite me as an adult again and again. Um, and it took those years of self-work and self-examination and looking at how those patterns were affecting my life and how they were not serving me, that I could learn really firsthand what living a life of honesty and integrity and accountability, how that actually is where my real power lies, and how it allowed me to take the reins of my life back and create the life that that I knew deep inside was available, that I knew it was possible. But I really didn't see it by looking around me and seeing other men. Like it seemed to me, I saw much more men who were suffering at that time, or living with the same sort of bad codes, that it wasn't helpful going to my peers. But by seeking out a coach, here was somebody who had the life experience and tools that and the ability to communicate to me in a way that I was actually able to hear the value of living an intentional life and living in accordance with values that I commit to. And they've been absolutely game-changing, absolutely essential. And I'm curious, you and I have been working together for several months, and I'm curious for you, what brought you to coaching? What had you reach out for support?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like there's something. Well, let me back up a little bit. I was unhappy, and really seeing how I kept on messing up. And in some ways I was oblivious to the ways I was messing up, but in a lot of ways I saw it happening. In real time. I'm like, gosh, why am I still doing these things that are in the moment making the situation worse? I never did the thing that made the situation better. It was always the thing that made it worse. And I was not prepared to deal with some of the emotional challenges that I was experiencing. I'd had my dad die about 2 years previous, and even though I felt like I was maybe not doing as bad as some other people I knew in similar circumstances, I was still not at all confident that what I was doing was really on the right track. No way to know if I was on a pathway that was actually going to take me somewhere productive. And so I ended up going to the Tending Male Fire men's retreat, which is where we met.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
and that's a whole story there. And it was amazing to be able to be with men working on men's issues and in a context of what I would call supreme safety, sacred safety even, and what that allowed this group of men to be able to do, including myself. And going to that retreat and seeing you be the facilitator of the events, I got to witness you and see, and I think I responded mostly subconsciously. And this is something that is really key, because I didn't set out to get a men's coach. But when I spent time with you in person, I knew that I wanted to get what you had. It was very clear to me. I was like, I want some of that, and I'm not even sure what it is.
Yeah, what's that you were picking up on?
It was this mixture of calm, but also joyful and confident and very honest, in a way that was kind of eye-opening, and I experienced at that retreat some conflict with another with another, I don't know, member, I guess, another person attending the retreat. I experienced some conflict with this person, and you helped mediate in a way, or maybe not mediate, but you advised me on how to deal with it. And I went from being totally flummoxed and having no idea what to do about this person to you explaining it to me and me going, wow, that's really obvious and simple. Okay, I'll try it. And I tried it and it worked perfectly. I was like, wow, I didn't realize this could be solved that, easily and with that kind of straightforward approach. And it's just, it opened me up to how much I needed help to get the solutions that I wanted. And there's something else that I really noticed at this retreat, and that's everyone's faces. I really clue into people's faces in a conscious way. I'm sure also a subconscious way, but in a conscious way too. And everybody's face at that retreat changed from the beginning to the end. Everyone looked younger. Everyone looked brighter. They actually saw like a spark in their eyes. So I was very, just very aware of this facial dynamic to how being emotionally intelligent, having some joy in your heart and having some honesty and all of these things to me really showed in the face. And I noticed that about you. And I was like, yeah, I saw that in you the whole time. And I was like, I trust him. And I'd like to get help from that person. And another thing was, through our experience there at the retreat, I knew that I could hear your advice. I could hear it and take it in, and I would give everything you said a fair shot. As opposed to if I had been kind of blindly hunting for a men's coach, I think I'd be just a lot more skeptical without having had this in-person experience that I had with you. And so I knew that working with someone whose input and advice I wanted to try for myself was going to make all the difference. That's everything. I need to be able to hear it, and if not outright believe it, give it the best shot I could and see for myself.
Yeah.
So long way.
So it sounds like, no, it's great. It sounds like your direct experience with me created, and the experience of me, the authenticity that I was bringing, and some of the tools that I seem to have, and some of which I shared with you, that, but it was really the direct experience that generated this sense of trust and that you saw something that you wanted to learn more about. And and so that makes a lot of sense to me. One of the things that I'd say is a challenge for me as a coach is there's kind of this voice in my head that's like, well, why do it? Like, why not just refer men to John Wineland? Like, guy's a boss. He runs a fantastic show, and something about what you said about that. There's a way that when I would talk, you were able to hear it. That it reminds me of something a friend of mine shared with me recently. She said, there are different people not everybody's going to respond to a John Wineland. They're going to respond to, there's going to be people that are going to feel comfortable with you that they may not feel comfortable with another coach, right? Like when I listen to John Wineland talk, I'm just like, wow, like I love that guy, right? And yet there are certain things that he and I actually don't fully agree on. There is actually daylight between some of our positions, but for me, it's like he's good enough, so why bother? And you just kind of pointed that out, that we like what we like. We are, attracted to certain personality types, and that's reason enough. If if I am someone that people feel comfortable coming to and working with, then that's enough. I don't need to question, my existential position as a role as a coach. I can just let that be enough. And that's been a lesson that I've had to really kind of work through to find my inspiration. It's like, okay, you know, is this something I really want to devote my time and energy to? Obviously, I want to help men. I feel passionate about that. And let's actually talk a little bit about the plight of men and really in your, coming from yourself, like for men such as yourself who are in a situation, you're married with a kid, a young child, and you got one on the way, and you've been with your wife now for what, like 5 years?
Oh man. Well, we've known each other for 9 years, and we've been,
Nine
yeah,
years
married for about five. Yeah.
married for 5, yeah. Um, what what do you imagine, what are some of the pain points for you being a man in that situation and in our society? And what do you imagine some of the other pain points for other men who are in a similar situation?
Oh, how much time do you got?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
well,
an hour.
yeah. Uh, hard stop. Um, oh man. Conflict is very unproductive. And I feel like
Mm,
and I feel like some sort of conflict should be productive. You
yes.
know, I'm over here, you're over there. We need to come together, and we always end up getting further apart. And that right there is probably like the key part of most of my problems in that realm. Yeah, and what I've learned so
And
far
how does
is
that, yeah, go ahead.
what I've learned about myself is that I have this absolutely all powerful aversion to emotional discomfort, which gets triggered when there's a conflict. And
Hmm.
it's like the reverse poles on a magnet, and I just get pushed away immediately, and I can't not redirect the discomfort to get it away from myself. And so
Hmm.
I'm immediately defensive, and I'm trying to find ways to put the spotlight on my partner instead.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
immediate and instantaneous. It's almost funny. I could laugh at myself if I had a moment of self-reflection during an argument, how just immediately my brain goes to, yeah, but you did this the other day. It's yeah.
Right, right. Yep, yep. And so it sounds like you've kind of figured out that your threat response is fight, where you're
Yeah.
going there's a defensiveness that reflexively comes up to protect you. And and you can see that that's a safety mechanism, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
part of you that is really just trying to seek safety. It's not, you don't actually want to attack her. You're looking
Right.
for some way to avoid the discomfort of the conflict that's coming up. And how do you get out of it? And how do you seek safety? And
Yeah.
so that, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But not real effective in creating connection and understanding.
Right. And
Right.
to kind of more directly answer your question, I'd say the connection and understanding would be my largest pain point right now. That is, it's so big of a topic right now for me that I don't know, everything else seems pretty small in comparison.
So it sounds to me that this the issue, the struggle you have with conflict, and the pain that it causes you, um, how does it affect the rest of your relationship when you're not fighting? Is there a bleed effect? Does it, when the conflicts don't go well, how does that affect the quality of connection, in general?
It just puts a damper on everything. Everything gets kind of turned down. I assume you mean like when the post conflict.
Yeah, post conflict,
Yeah.
you're right, because you're not fighting all the time, right?
Right. Right.
So there's going to be a periods of conflict. There's going to be moments of conflict, and then there's the rest of the sort of, I would call your relational baseline.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
you guys are the rest of the time. And do you see any impact that how the where the conflict isn't being managed productively? What is the cost or impact to the relationship in general?
I I mean, it sounds extreme, but it's the cost is like all of the beneficial parts of the relationship. It's
Yeah, that's right.
they just all go away. And yeah,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
still continue a kind of a professional relationship, if you will, but everything else, all of the affection and interest and just kind of joy, those all get turned way, way down. And then I'll
Hmm.
be going through long periods feeling really just kind of deprived of love, of specifically of like, yeah, I'm just
Hmm.
not getting any affection or anything that makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. And so, yeah, it's a big cost. And then, of course, I would be operating kind of on eggshells in a way. The everyone's patience is lower. The threshold for more conflict is just not as pronounced, and it's yeah, difficult. Let's see what else. It means that I'm not trying to find ways to please or give joy to my partner because I'm not thinking
Hmm.
about it. I'm just kind of I get more selfish maybe, and
Hmm.
just it's sort of and I think my wife has used this before. We get into kind of an every man for themselves kind of mode,
Hmm.
and I definitely feel
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Oh, and no sex whatsoever.
Hmm.
When you get into
Yeah.
that mode, it's sort of like all intimacy in that way is just like It's sort of like it's the door gets closed, and you
Right.
almost kind of forget
Right.
it's there. You're both in a different frame of mind, and which
And
makes
then,
the opposite so distinct because when things do go well, if I don't totally crash the bus, then it's sort of like, oh man, affection, wow, it's happening. It's just natural. It's like breathing. So
yeah, right. Yeah. 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 And when you're locked into that, that state, that kind of, uh, you know, every man for themselves, you're just, there's an eggshells, there's this feeling like everything's turned down, no sex, like the likelihood of another conflict increases dramatically. Right. And then it's almost like you get into what the Gottman Institute calls is this like the four horsemen of relational apocalypse show up, right? Which is um, it's defensiveness, stonewalling, criticism, and oh, I'm going to forget the last one, contempt.
mm,
And these start to show up, right? The defensiveness is usually the first, and then there's criticism is usually not far behind. And then you start to get into stonewalling, which is this kind of like, well, no sex. And then eventually you get to contempt. And once you start spending time in contempt with your partner, um, as you said so well, like everything good about being in a relationship just disappears. It's like, then there's this, all you're left with is this question mark. It's like, what am I doing? Why am I even bothering? I don't feel seen. I don't feel loved. I don't feel respected. I don't feel honored. I don't feel trusted. I don't feel like I'm seen as a good man, a good partner. And that's just no way to live. It's certainly not the relationship anyone that I would want to sign up for. Right. So I can feel your pain there.
But I'm not alone.
You're not alone.
What's the percentage you feel like of relationships that get to enjoy all of those wonderful adjectives you just listed off? I feel like that it's so few. I mean, in my personal life,
Yeah.
I don't even know if I know any men that would describe their own experience that way of feeling like loved and honored and respected and just kind of this glow of their relationship. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't see it ever.
That's so sad.
It
That's
is
so sad.
It's awful.
It really, it's awful. And I've been in those relationships. I know what those feel like. They're awful. And I think you're right. I think that a lot of other men in relationships really struggle in that same space, like how to manage conflict in a healthy way. And yet, there's, and this is the thing. I mean, there's lots of education available, right? We live in in the information age. Like there's tons of information available to learn how to manage conflict well, but for whatever reason, it's not something that we tend to educate ourselves on. Like I'm a relationship geek, and so I live and breathe this stuff, but I still find it really challenging to pick up a how-to book and educate myself on some given skill. And yet sitting with a bro and talking it out feels a lot more natural and easy. And especially if I'm working with a coach, that can kind of, where I feel like seen and understood by the coach, such that the advice that I'm being given or the guidance I'm being given is going to land more effectively because there's this relationship of trust that I wouldn't have with an instructional video or a book or something.
Yes, and I think that really mirrors what I was saying about how I could hear the advice from you. And I still guilt myself about not taking either free or very low cost information and using it. I guilt myself.
Right.
I have books. I can read books. Nothing. You didn't invent any of this stuff. Like, it's all out there.
Nope.
But I'm not taking it and I'm not using it, at least not at the level that I would if you and I have a conversation. And that's something that I've had to really change about my own psychology, just as I grow into an adult finally, and be like, okay, the advice that I will hear is worth so much more than the advice that I won't. Like I'm paying for
that's a great
change.
Quote. Yeah.
I'm paying for the change in me, not the actual information. I need to change. And if talking with somebody will make me change more than reading a book, then it's worth it. So that's what I've been trying to get inside.
And there's something about pain that is a real motivator for change.
Absolutely.
In a way that
one of the only.
When we're happy, it's hard to muster the drive and motivation to make significant changes in who we are. I think that that growth comes as a result of challenge.
And that's an interesting perspective there on like the change that, or the sorry, the pain that motivates for the change. And what I wonder what you would say about a relationship that is endurable, but not great and not so much pain that you wake up and start doing something about it. And then what I want you to also comment on, are there ways that we are kind of almost self-medicating so that the pain doesn't get so high that we make a change?
Absolutely. I mean, you're nailing it. I mean, I think that most of us find ourselves in some form of relational mediocrity. You know, it may not be bad, so bad that we got to leave or get divorced and all of the consequences that come with that, but it's not good either. Like we don't feel inspired. And so, where do we get our, how do we scratch that itch that's looking for fulfillment, that's looking for inspiration or just to feel good, that dopamine hit? And of course, we live in, we've never had more access to distraction and, substance use. It's, weed is legal now and alcohol is easily available. There's lots of substances or, doom scrolling or just losing yourself in whatever so that you don't have to experience really the kind of just disappointing quality of of connecting with our partner. I know some, you see some folks that like it almost looks like they just don't, they don't even like each other anymore, but they're still together.
Right.
Like you see them together and it just doesn't look like they're enjoying themselves at all. But for whatever reason, they're still staying together. And that to me just feels, it just feels really tragic, really sad because, as far as we know, we got one life, and as Mary Oliver says, what are we going to do with our one precious life? It's a real challenge that I think a lot of men are facing. Do you think that, for guys in your situation, like managing conflict do you see that as the key to unlocking the kind of joy that you'd like to have in your relationship?
I mean, to be honest, I have no idea what like how far upstream the resolving conflict part of the equation is.
Yeah.
But it seems like such a such a common factor in so many relationships, and it for me anyway, conflict is where my worst qualities or my weak links really come out in a conflict. Like if we're kind of feeling all right, then my weaknesses or my flaws, they just don't matter that much. But conflict is sort of like I don't know, it's where the rubber meets the road and you have to prove yourself.
Yeah.
But
right.
Proving yourself when times are good doesn't really mean anything. So.
Right. That's right. Yeah. But I guess where I'm going with this is that I think that there's a way that conflict can sort of reset the loneliness, the frustration. It kind of keeps us in a suboptimal frequency. It's like we get in a conflict, it doesn't go well, neither one of us feel good about it. And then as we mentioned before, like it's potentiating the next conflict. Next conflict comes online. Again, we're bringing energy from the unresolved previous conflict now into this one, whether we're aware of it or not. And then it just sort of perpetuates, and we get calloused. We get emotionally and psychically calloused to that state. And we grow deaf to the needs of our partner because they're always needy. They always got needs. And it doesn't matter. And I could listen all day and it's not going to make a difference, right? It's this feeling of helplessness, powerlessness, frustration, not knowing how to make a change, how to get out of that, even if that a different reality is even possible with this person. Right. So we're just we become resigned. And I think that when we give up, if you will, or we surrender to it, I feel like part of our soul just kind of dies. And we end up being in this half alive state that is handling, all the adulting more or less, but there's no like the juice that was there maybe at the beginning of the relationship feels like a distant memory, like a fossil even. And I think we take in these narratives, societal narratives that say, yeah, well, that's just marriage. That's just relationship. You get 9 months or you get, 2 years, and then, it's the old ball and chain, and you just make the best of it. And while I think that there are moments, periods, phases in relationship where it's even, best case scenario, it's still going to be challenging. For example, when, our partner is pregnant and we have a toddler, like those are really challenging factors that are going to be putting an extraordinary, allostatic stress burden on your psyche and your relationship. And I see the opportunity there is that there's really no, like it magnifies the need for the growth that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. There's less capacity to even be resigned because there's so much that has to be done.
Oh, absolutely. I've expressed this to my own friends before, of just how it turns your everyday life into this high performance sport where you really do need to eat well, you need to sleep well, and you're like an athlete, and if you don't perform, then your marriage falls apart and you put your kids through a divorce, and the stakes are just crazy high, and it's wild.
Yeah. So last time we met, we discussed some strategies, some conflict management strategies.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know if you had an opportunity to put any of those into practice.
Yeah, pretty much right away. Yeah. And
you did right away. Okay.
Yeah. It was nothing too serious. Oops. Which is good. And I had asked you the question of like, if I'm not fighting back, am I just creating this backlog that's gonna breed resentment inside myself after the conflict is done?
Right.
And you said, well, let's just see what happens. Let's try not to fight back and listen and hear your partner, and then let's just see what happens. And what happened was, I did that. I did my best to just listen and not allow myself to be triggered. And what happened was that within about a day or two at most, I was on the receiving end of affection. I was getting affection kind of just randomly. And I'll tell you, I kind of just forgot about what might have been resentment, what I might have thought would have turned into resentment. I kind of just forgot. It went away because all of a sudden my relationship felt more loving. And boy, did that feel good. And I don't know if there was any other way it should have gone, but that's how I experienced it.
Okay, great. So, the distinction, the really like the game changer here is, becoming familiar with, okay, what is a trigger? What does it look and feel like when it happens? How do I know when I'm triggered? And then what do I do about it when that happens? That's part of that, emotional intelligence, skill craft. Another just really simple way of saying it is, the switch is really, instead of looking at conflict as something that we have to win or lose, that it's an opportunity to understand our partner's experience and what's happening for them. And when we come to it from that angle, even when they're really upset and maybe they're yelling, if we are bringing ourselves forward, with all the body language and the words that are aligned with an intent to understand, it's amazing just how quickly our partner's anger just dissipates. It's like, oh, okay, you're listening, you're getting. And because anger, right? Like the anger, for you, you said like you want to avoid conflicts. Well, so do our partners. They want to avoid conflicts as well. They don't like getting into those, right? So their stress, their, trigger is already up at the get-go, just bringing it. And when they're met with this calm, loving, kind understanding, then they realize that, oh, you're on my team. We're on the same team. And this idea of like, I'm right, you're wrong, kind of just, it just dissipates. I think one of the key understandings there, or one of the key things to get though, is that understanding our partner is not agreement. It doesn't mean that we're agreeing with their version of the events or where accountability should lie. Understanding is simply recognizing their experience, how it occurred to them, right? It's a way of coming in with curiosity and inquiry and care. And once a person feels heard and understood, then all the pressure to fight and the conflict, it's like it's gone. And what's left is these warm feelings of connection. So in this case, when you guys had a little conflict, how did you go about demonstrating a listening and understanding way of being? How did you do that?
It was really just simply listening and asking some clarifying questions and not offering a rebuttal of any kind. That was really it. And as simple as that sounds, it wasn't easy. It's just shockingly, surprisingly, embarrassingly hard to do.
What was hard about it?
Well, my internal dialogue was something along the lines of like, yeah, but she's done this exact thing to me, maybe even in the same day or something. Like I'm finding articles of evidence to show that my tally sheet is somehow, different from hers. Like like the scoreboard, like my score is higher. Like look at the scoreboard right now. I've got more points than you. Is really like what my brain is trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. Like where you're hearing her version of events, right?
Yeah.
And there's some piece that, it's like, wait, that's not accurate.
Right.
You know, that's not the whole story. That's not the complete story. And there's an impulse that wants to correct their perception, right? Their story. And so that urge can be really strong in the moment. If all we did was shut up and listen, and that's all we did, it would resolve a lot of the conflict, but it actually just moves the conflict within us. It builds resentment because
Ah.
we are not feeling understood now.
Okay. So I need to hear more on that then. So what
Yeah.
do you do?
Well, right. Well, so this exercise was a little bit of a setup. I wanted you to experience like the struggle of first learning the tool of listening, right? And demonstrating understanding. And then once you're then there's another part to it, right? Um, for example, um, recently, I had a date night with my wife, and she surprised me with a playful lap dance, right? And it was great. I loved every second of it. But afterwards, she's like, how was that? And I was like, oh, that was amazing. I really loved that. It was great. Um, and I offered her a little bit of feedback, right? I was just like, I really would have loved it if you had spent more time, like kind of grinding on me, and like would have liked more physical contact. I really liked that part. And I would have liked more of that. And she did not take it well. She got pretty
Mm.
butthurt about it. She was just like, God, like, and then she starts using these terms like you always, right? You never, right? These absolutes,
Mm.
right? That tell me, okay, she's triggered. Because when she's not triggered, she doesn't use absolute terms like that, right? So I kind of sat up and I was like, oh, okay, here we go, right? And so I started asking her some questions, but she really wasn't interested in my understanding. She just wanted to swing back. She was just like, you know, fuck you, dude. Like, I just gave you a lap dance. Can't you just tell me I'm a good girl? You know? And, and valid, right? Like, yeah, that's what I should have done. That's what I should have done. But, and, I told her that, I was like, yep, you're right. I should have done that, Um, but she was still smoldering. It took a little while for her to come back online. And in my head, I'm sitting here thinking, like, if we had a scoreboard of the number of times that she has given me feedback
Mm.
versus me giving her feedback, they wouldn't even be close, right? Like, I get a mountain of feedback, and I have to be pretty careful with my feedback to her because it'll really level her. I mean, she'll take it in, and it can devastate her. It can derail her whole day, right? And so I'm sitting with this, and I'm like, how do I say this, right? Like, because the very act of sharing my experience, I'm afraid is going to come off as criticism, you know? And so, but if I'm just sitting on that, I guarantee you that the next time she's, giving me feedback or criticizing me, like in my mind, that resentment part's just gonna be putting another notch on the board, right? And I'm gonna be sitting with that, and it's gonna be stewing, and resentment's gonna build. So what I did was, I waited until the next day, and we were having breakfast, and I said, "Hey, can we talk a little bit about what happened last night?" Um, I, because we were in the moment, I didn't really feel safe to bring my feelings into the matter, and I'd like to share my feelings around it. Are you in a space to hear that? And and she was like, yeah, I'm good. Yeah, share with me. And I was like, okay, great. And then I just shared. I said, this is my experience. Is that I feel like I have to be very careful in providing you feedback. I feel like I accept feedback more gracefully than you do, and it feels like it sets up this dynamic where I'm getting a lot more feedback than you are. And of course, she smiles at me cheekily, and she's like, yeah, well, I'm just better, and so I don't need as much feedback as you do, right? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure, naturally. But she heard it, and she was like, yeah. And I was like, and I feel vulnerable sharing this with you because I'm afraid that even this feedback is gonna upset you. And I'm not really looking. What I think I really want you to understand is that I recognize that our nervous systems are different, and that I have like an unreasonable capacity for feedback. It's like a love language for me. To me, my brain turns the translator on, and it receives feedback as a form of love, as care. It's like this person's giving me the instructions on how I can better connect to them, right? It's like they're throwing me a bone here. So I see it as almost like it's a form of generosity, and I appreciate it. But that's weird. Not a lot of people, see feedback that way. And so it's not, the fact that she doesn't meet me there, that the fact that I have a greater capacity for feedback than her is just one area in which I have a higher level of mastery in an area in our relationship than she does. And she's got other areas that she has higher levels of mastery in than I do, right? But here's one of my strong suits, right? And so I said, all I really want is is for that to just be recognized. I just want you to acknowledge that there's that the distribution of criticism or feedback between us is asymmetrical. It's not even, it's not equal. And I just like what would even make it yummier is if I could be acknowledged for that and even praised. Like, tell me how much you appreciate the fact that you feel so safe to give me feedback. And you struggle, or you wish that you could provide the same to me. And then it's like all the resentment, and I said that, and she heard it, and she was like, oh my God, yes. And, and it was very easy for her to just say, I love you so much. Thank you so much for the way you listen, the way you understand. I feel so seen. I feel so loved, deeper than I ever have by anyone ever. And you're right. My insecurities get in the way. I get triggered, and I'm not as good as you in receiving feedback. And I'm sorry. You deserve that. And I'm a work in progress to get there. But you're such a good role model for me, and I'm so grateful for your capacity in this regard. And it was like, boom, done. Like, no resentment. I felt great. I felt proud of myself, and I was ready to go. And that conflict felt complete because I felt like I had been understood, and even, I got some praise there. Uh, and so the trick though is in the timing, right? Of when do I get mine? When do I get my turn to be understood?
Yeah.
Right? Because if it's in the moment, sometimes, depending, like if it's not a real big upset, if it's just something kind of minor, and then I'll say something like, do you feel complete? Do you feel understood? Do you feel like I got it?
Mm-hmm.
And if she says yes, then I'll say, okay, are you available to understand my experience?
Mm-hmm.
And my wife now, she knows she's going to actually check with herself. Am I actually available for that right now? Most of the time when this is a new method, when this is a new experience, oftentimes the partner will just sort of like unconsciously say, yes, I'm available. But, what do I need to understand? When they're not actually like their nervous system hasn't actually settled. They're not actually regulated. They're still dysregulated, and they're just not aware of it. Right. So some of that, as a good partner, I can kind of read, I can kind of tell, is she actually, so before I even ask, I want to actually just kind of make an assessment. Is now a good time? And if it's not a good time, then I might say something like, hey, do you feel complete? Do you feel heard? Do you feel like I got it? Was there anything I was missing? No? Okay, great. I would also like to share my experience with you. However, I'd like to wait until we have had some time to digest this experience. Could we circle back round tomorrow? And would you make some time for me to listen to my side? And, any good partner is going to say, of course, to that, right? And then it's up to you to, like, okay, create that time and space for that.
Yeah.
And bring your experience forward. And I have found that the best way to do that is to start with vulnerability, right? Saying, hey, I want you to know, like, I'm going to share some of this experience with you, and it feels important that it feels like I want to feel understood here, but I also want to make it clear that the reason I want this understanding is because I want to leverage conflict in a way that brings us closer. I want to leverage where conflict comes up. I want to find ways that we get to turn this into an opportunity for growth and deeper understanding of one another and deeper trust, right? Like when we both feel understood by our partner, trust goes up. When we don't feel understood, trust goes down. And trust is the life force of relationship. Our freedom, the freedom we feel in relationship, is directly correlated to the safety in that relationship. So as the safety goes up, then our sense and our feeling of freedom goes up. Because then we feel like, hey, I'm exactly where I want to be in life. I'm exactly with the person. I'm exactly in the relationship I want to be. And you feel free. But if that's not happening and you're harboring resentment, then you're going to, then the relationship's going to feel like a cage.
And so I love the idea of looking at conflict as literally an opportunity to increase your trust value.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing what I usually do, not only am I turning down the opportunity to increase trust, I'm actually decreasing it. It's sort of like somebody's passing me a rope ladder to climb up. And I'm like, no, I'd
Yeah.
actually rather go down a few rungs right now. So no
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. We're like, they throw us a rope ladder and we're like, oh, okay. So it's a rope ladder. You always just throw down a rope ladder, like this is your go-to. You think I'm just going to climb up this and everything's gonna be fine? No, it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
we just want to, yeah.
And what other
Um,
types of what other common opportunities for trust enhancement are there in a relationship? Like how big of a piece of the pie is conflict in that regard?
huge, huge. I would
Yeah.
say, trust, by definition, trust is expected behavior over time. Right. So it's when the behavior of our partner or others, anyone, aligns with our expectations. And that happens over and over. Trust goes up. However, the that's not the only way to increase trust. In fact, some of the, you know, I'll say like the next level of trust beyond that would be intimacy,
Hmm.
right? And because intimacy is allowing myself to be seen, even more deeply than say the context of a conflict.
So you're
Um,
saying that the other side of the coin might be instead of loving and accepting your partner's perspective and experience, the other side of it would be allowing your partner to see yours. Am I getting that right?
yes, that's part of it. It's like trust, conflict. Let let's say there's no conflict in a relationship, and you got, you're doing your thing and she's doing her thing, and you're doing it day in, day out, and there's really no conflict. Or when there is, it's sorted easily. Things are going just fine, and there's like a high degree of trust in the relationship with respect to the observed behavior, right? With the respect to, yeah, my partner, like, she wifes well, I husband well, like, and the problem with that is not trust. The trust, is at a sort of stable level. Problem is that you end up becoming like roommates. The the sexual polarity, the attraction, the zest, that you have for your partner, it evaporates over time.
Yeah.
So what we, what we want at that moment is to kind of like lean into a little bit of risk, and lean in, like we're going to actually test the trust. We're going to reach for more freedom, right? Like the art of relationship is balancing two values or two needs, one for safety and one for freedom, right? And we try to find ways of balancing that. And most people, most men anyway, they don't realize that my freedom, if I limit my freedom to the safety, the feelings of safety for my partner. In other words, I don't do anything that she's not comfortable with, that we're not on the same page with, then we're going to build trust together there, right? But over time, that gets boring and we need to mix it up a little bit. We got to spice it up. So I want to take a little bit of risk in the relationship. And that's where intimacy can come in. And the risk I'm talking about is revealing parts of me that I may not be proud of, that I may not think she's going to like, that feel risky, that it may upset her. And so why would I do something like that? Why would I take that risk? Because when our partner surprises us and meets us in that vulnerability, and we feel seen there, then the trust goes deeper in a juicy way. Like now I feel like I really, like, this person really understands me deeply in a way nobody else does. And she becomes more valuable as a result of that, and vice versa. Like I just had an example. Maybe it'll come back. It's, but to do that well, it requires a little bit of coaching, right? Because what we want is, like, to go into that. It's kind of like, hey, I'm going to reveal some really vulnerable things, but my request is that you don't shame me or make me wrong for what I share with you, right? You're entitled to feel impacted, and you can express that impact, like how my words are impacting you. Like, let's say, for example, you said, I just want to share with you, there's there was a woman at the supermarket today that was kind of giving me flirty eyes, and I really enjoyed it. And she was very attractive, and I kind of like smiled and flirted back with her. And then sure enough, like when I was in line, she kind of pulled into line behind me, and we were, waiting to check out, and we had some casual conversations, and she gave me her number, and I want to share that with you. And let's say in that example, your wife really, she said, wow, hearing that, I notice I feel really insecure. I feel like a little scared about you going and picking up women at the supermarket. Right? And that's where you can gently nudge her back and say, hold on. I asked that you not make me wrong for what I did, but I do hear that it upsets you, right? I do hear that my behavior in that case, by casually flirting back and receiving her number, that upset you. And she's like, yes, that upset me. How could I have responded that would have had you feel differently, that would have had you actually feel like more honored? And she might say, well, if you had refused her number and told her that you were happily married. Got it. Yeah, I can totally see that. I can see how that would have you feel more honored. And I appreciate you, sharing that, right? And this is just like a tiny example, but it starts to normalize sharing with one another what happens in the hours that we're apart, right? Starts to normalize that kind of level of communication. To take it deeper, it might be something like, hey, can I share something vulnerable with you? And notice every time I'm asking first before I share something, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, do you have time? Are you available? May I share something, right? I want to check in first to see if she's even available for it. And that sets up the likelihood for success of her actually listening and engaging in the way that I want. It increases the chances of that, right? So I say, can I share something vulnerable with you? When I struggle when we get into conflict. I end up feeling like I'm sitting on eggshells, and I feel like you really get to share, and I work hard at listening to your side, but I don't feel like you offer me the same. And that feels vulnerable to share because I'm afraid you're going to get upset with me or get defensive. And what I'm really looking for is to feel your care and to feel your love and your desire to want to understand my experience. And And then that's setting it up for success, right? Where she's like, oh, okay, that's what you're looking for. You just want to feel understood. That's really easy. Thank you for sharing that with me. And now you've created more intimacy between the two of you. And as you practice this and you start to exercise that ability to actually share vulnerably, then you'd be surprised at everything that's on the table. Hey, I notice that like during sex and you go down on me, I feel your teeth a lot and it really is distracting for me. And I'd really love it if you could bring more awareness to that, right? Like maybe that's something you would never say, but every time she goes down on you, you're like, oh God, you're bracing yourself, right? But, so it's just like these opportunities to share our experience and to build that kind of intimacy, like if not with our wife, then with who?
Well, the girl from the grocery store, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So what I'm hearing there is that the steps on the way to a better relationship really are made together and with communication. And something, revealing something vulnerable and talking about it is how you both are going to move to a better relationship. It's not there's not really an alternative way. That like there are other ways that will
Right.
help improve, but if you don't have that one, you're missing the whole boat, it seems.
Yep. And there are better ways to do that than others. There are more skillful ways of creating safety and intimacy than others, right? Like,
Yeah.
for example, do you have time to listen? May I share, right? Like, that's the first
Yeah.
piece of sort of like skill craft, right? And then the next piece is I have something vulnerable that feels vulnerable for me to share. It feels vulnerable because I'm afraid you're going to get upset, or I'm afraid you're not going to like what I have to say. And that's so that's the next piece is the vulnerability. But then the next piece is creating the safety behind it and saying, and I want you to feel like you are entitled to your feelings. Like whatever I'm going to share with you, it's like if you get upset, you are entitled to get upset. Like your upsetness is not wrong or misplaced here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like you can be upset, but what I ask is that you connect to me or you speak to me from your heart, that you honor my vulnerability with your own. Right? So the skill craft is setting up the stage so that conversation, that vulnerability has the best chances for success, for deeper connection. If instead I didn't take those steps and I just kind of rolled up on her, while she's distracted, overwhelmed, stressed, or whatever, and she's not actually available, and I'm like, hey, I want to tell you about this, what happened at the grocery store. And maybe there's a bit of braggadocio in it, right? And I'm just kind of like, hey, yeah, I still got it, you
Right.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Then that's not vulnerability. It doesn't sound like a vulnerability. It sounds like a brag. And her reaction is probably not going to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Her reaction is going to be say something snarky. Right. And so that does not bring you closer. Although I will admit that a healthy dose of snarky in any relationship, I think, is a good thing. I think being, I think there's something to be said for a good back and forth, but in a playful way. Does that make sense? So what you said, you nailed it. You're absolutely right. Like this is the way that otherwise conflict goes poorly and the relationship gets beat up as a result of that. But if we can turn like reframe the context of conflict from I've done something wrong and I'm bad, or my partner is crazy, they're unreasonable, they're unfair,
Yeah.
or something's wrong with me, I'm a bad partner. Like if we get those are the error modes, right?
Yes.
And if we get stuck in those, then it's the likelihood it goes well is it drops. But if we can take these, learn the skill craft that goes with managing conflict, conscientiously, wisely, then we can reframe the context from division to like experiences that actually enrich the relationship, have us both hugging each other on the other side of it and feeling grateful for the conflict. Imagine feeling grateful.
I mean, just that right there, I think would be a huge piece for someone hearing this that might be like, wait, you mean I could, if done correctly, at some point soon after the conflict, I could actually feel grateful that it happened? Because I don't think most people would assume that that was even the goal, or possible, let alone the goal.
Right. 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 Yeah, it's the reality that I live in, and it's the reality that I've helped many men reach, right? Where they are able to completely reframe conflict,
Yeah.
and see it as, so that even when conflict comes up, there's even a part of them that gets excited.
I mean, yeah, I suppose if you did it enough, you learned it kind
Yeah.
of on a cellular level that as a result of this somewhat painful process, we're going to get somewhere better immediately
Yeah.
afterwards, basically. Then yeah, have a learned response of like, oh, this is the door has been cracked and we can actually go through it. So
Now that, yeah.
I was just wondering, so you have a conflict, someone has a conflict. How do you know, how soon should it be obvious that it was a success or a failure? Like, what are the signs of success, and should you expect them like right there in the moment, or could a successful conflict not really appear to be a success until a day or two later? Like, how do you know if you did it right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. It's all of the above,
Okay.
you're going to know because it may not be clear, especially if she's really triggered at the end of the conflict, right? But you'll know if your behavior, if you have not, um, if you've been kind and you've been understanding and you've done, you have done your part to show up conscientiously to the conflict. And yet still at the end of it, she still feels rattled and dysregulated, and she's not actually available for connection. Then that becomes, there's another opportunity, right? Like another opportunity shows up, right? Where you get to say, um, like, honey, take your time. Like you still seem upset. Um, and I'm not sure that talking, like I feel like I understand you, and it seems to me like we just need take some time. And then the opportunity is how gratuitous can you be, right? Like, hey, why don't you go for a walk? I'll put the kid to bed, right? I'll clean up after dinner, or I'll, let me take something off of your plate so that you can be with these feelings, right? Like, how do you think your anger is going to hold up when she's faced with that, right?
Right.
she's going to be on that walk reflecting, going, I'm the luckiest woman in the world. Like, this guy has got me figured out, and he is really on my team. He's really here to support me. And even if she doesn't, right? Let's say she goes out and she comes up with 5 more things to bring up, right? Well, you've given yourselves both time to de-escalate, time to regulate, right? Which, as we discussed before, like, nothing good comes from an argument when both people are upset. It just doesn't work well because our brains are offline. We're in threat response, we're in our reptilian brain, and we think with a fraction of the horsepower. So the likelihood that we are going to come to a shared understanding when we are both triggered is like next to zero. It's just,
Yeah.
it's not optimal, to say the least, right? So when we're both upset, we want to give ourselves time, right? Well, in this case, you're doing that. She's upset. You're not. You feel regulated, right? But creating some time for her to kind of cool down is going to work. And when she comes back, I'm not saying that she's going to come right back into your arms, but there's a good chance she might. That the first thing she does when she walks back in the house is just come into your arms, and she just wants to be held, and she's going to tell you how much she loves you, right? If she doesn't, she comes back and she's still cooking. All right, let her cook.
Yeah.
At this point, it's about, your own dignity. You're going to hold your self-respect, and you're going to allow her and her timing to approach you. And if it goes on for a day or two and she's giving you the silent treatment, or is being stonewalling or something like that, then that becomes an opportunity to say, hey, this is what I'm noticing. And it seems like we are not actually complete with our discussion, the conflict that we had yesterday. What's going on for you? Help me understand.
Gosh, it's so funny because now I'm sort of like, yeah, I realize this will change as soon as it happens, but I'm like, hey, I want the conflict to happen so I can do it, so I can do the thing. So short of waiting for the next conflict, or worse, creating one, what are some ways that I could take advantage of some of this skill craft in normal life?
Yeah.
Increase
great.
trust, in the absence of a conflict.
Yep. Great. I'm still a work in progress on some of on what I'm going to share here, but like, my wife is a talker. She loves to just share everything with me, right? And I'm not always as present as I would like to be. Sometimes I get distracted in my own thoughts. I'm kind of coming in and out of the relationship, or the conversation, and she can notice, she can tell. And sometimes it bothers her, and sometimes it doesn't, but she can tell that I'm not fully present with her. But when I am fully present with her and I am listening to her, she gets excited. She can tell. And so she gets, there's more energy in her sharing, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, like, then I actually, I will help navigate the conversation. I'll be like, I really want to connect. I really want to hear what you have to share. I really want to talk to you. I want to connect. But what you're talking about here, I'm having a hard time feeling interested in. It's like you're telling me about this one patient, she's an acupuncturist, right? Like, this one patient's, the relational issues that they're having, and that's not working with their, whatever it is. It's like, it's like 2-3 degrees removed. And I'm just not that interested. And so I might say, I'm just having trouble staying interested in what you're sharing, but I am interested in you. And so can I ask you a question? And that's the key there. May I ask you a question? Like allowing my curiosity to draw me more into the conversation, right? And I might ask a question, hey, what is it about this that you're talking about that is so interesting to you, right? Like the content of her story doesn't interest me, but the fact that she wants to share it with me, that's more interesting to me. And she might say something like, well, I don't know, I just like sharing my day with you. Why do you like sharing your day with me? I don't know, honey, because I feel connected to you. Oh, do you want to feel more connected to me right now? Yeah, I guess, but I don't want to snuggle or cuddle. I want to talk. Okay, so you want to feel closer to me. You want to feel more connected, but you want to talk. Yeah. Okay, great. Love that. And then looking for ways in the conversation where we're both participating and we're both enjoying the conversation, where I'm not just sort of like giving her, I'm not just like a heartbeat in the room, but like I'm actually engaging with her in the conversation. But in order to do that, I might have to set some boundaries. I might have to redirect the conversation in a direction that is more interesting for me, right? And every time I do that, I role model to her how to do it to me. When I start babbling about Lord of the Rings or, Star Wars or some shit, and she's just like, she's just a living eye roll. And
Yeah.
so she then sees, oh, okay, yeah, I can, thank you, honey. I see that you're really into, you're really into this and the Star Wars. I think that's awesome. What is it, about Star Wars that you love so much? What is it about science fiction? What is it about, Jedis that you
Yeah.
are so into, and then, the conversation she can redirect. So to your question, like, where is this applicable outside of conflict? Anytime you're connecting, it's all about presence. It's all about where is your attention? Like these are encoded in ancient myths, right? We talk about the Hindu myth of creation, right? There's Brahma, who is the sort of like universe, this kind of dispassionate, just sort of like unfocused awareness or consciousness. And then in that, there was a desire arose from all of this everything but nothing. There was a yearning, a desire was born, a desire for something. And in that moment, the god Shiva was born. He was incarnated. And he became the incarnation of masculine drive, energy, focus, presence. He became the masculine incarnation of our sort of attention. And as soon as that happened, he needed something, he yearned for something to capture his attention. And in that moment, Shakti was incarnated. And she was created to yearn for his attention. And she began to dance and to seduce and persuade and to hold his attention. And in her dancing and in her emotional release and in her joy and in all the emotions she was having in trying to keep his attention, the grief of losing it, the anger of not having it, the joy of success of regaining it, all of those emotions create what we call as the Maya, which is the all of the illusion of separateness, the walls we're surrounded by, the food we eat, the bodies we inhabit, cause and effect, time, all of those things, reality as we know it, is the manifestation of Shakti dancing for Shiva's attention. So there's this wisdom encoded in this that's relational wisdom. That's like, there are going to be times, where our partner is really wanting our attention, and we can embody that presence and give it to her. And I have found that is the probably single most powerful sort of charismatic trait a man can possess, is the quality of his presence. It's something that men see. It's something that children see. Women certainly see it. And even animals are aware of it. And the more that we are able to cultivate presence, the more capacity we have for connection, for intimacy, for play, for ourselves, for our children, for all our relations. Presence is really just bringing our attention to the immediacy, to what is happening right here, right now, to include my desire for something different. Right? That's also presence. I may notice, I'm present to the fact that I'm not entirely satisfied with what's happening right now. I want something different. But presence is what keeps us from falling into a triggered state. Presence is what keeps us in connection to a state of understanding. It's what keeps us connected to our own somatic experience, what's happening for us emotionally, physically, intellectually. Like, we're able to notice it's where our attention is. And if our attention is in our head, then we're not actually present to the person that we're relating to. And so practicing presence, noticing when we go into our thoughts and we're not actually with our partner, when our partner is expecting us to be, right? Like if you're chopping onions in the kitchen, listening to a podcast, that's different. But if your partner's sharing something with you, and the more presence we can bring to it, especially when it's something sensitive, the more they're going to feel us with them. And the deeper that connection is going to be able to go.
I think that sounds like probably a good spot to wrap it up.
I think so.
And I think that would also be a great jumping off point for the next time, because I think talking about presence and how to improve it or
cultivate it
would be, yeah. I want to learn more.
Okay, great. Well, I'll give you a little bit of homework in that. So the mantra for presence is, what I'm noticing right now is. Right? So write it on your hand, write it on the back of your hand, tie a piece of string around your finger, whatever you need as a mnemonic device to bring you back to that mantra. What am I noticing right now? What am I noticing right now? What am I noticing right now? And in training our capacity to notice. So we'll leave it there with that tool, and let's pick it back up next week. And I'll be interested to see, A, how does the presence work? And B, how is conflict management, now that you have the additional tool, right, of being understood and asking for that, and you understand the importance of presence to intimacy, and that there are ways that you can bring these tools even when you're not in conflict, but that the goal is to be able to experience conflict in a new way that actually feels inspiring, nourishing, and opportunistic.
Excellent. Booster, thank you so much.
Done. I thank you, my friend. Thank you.
It's so
Yeah,
great.
it's always a
So
pleasure.
great.